Welcome back, guys. Today we're at Castle Dryslwyn, but before we have a look at the castle, I've actually done a bit of research. Shock horror, I've done some work. And I want to know why there's so many castles in Wales. Now, this is all to do with inheritance back in the day. Now, normally, England and Scotland, whenever the king died, everything went to the eldest born son or daughter, obviously. In Wales, it was different. When lords would pass away, the land that the lord held would be divided equally between all of his descendants, so all of his sons and all of his daughters. This was what they called the Marcher lords. So instead of having one heir, you'd have several heirs, and each heir in Wales was then allowed to build his own castle. Because when Edward first came and conquered Wales, because he had wars in France and against the Scots and occasional rebellions within England, he couldn't spend all of his time in Wales. So he allowed the Welsh, what's the word? You know, when you pass on to your heirs, he allowed this law of the marchers to continue. So what would happen in Wales was, when a lord died, let's say for example he died and he had 3 sons, each of his sons would then inherit a third of the lord's original land, and each of those sons would then build castles. And part of the marcher agreement with King Edward's at the time, they were allowed to build castles without the king's permission. Now, the Edwards did this, like I say, obviously to keep the Welsh sort of placated while he was off fighting wars against Scotland, France, etc, etc. But what would happen in Wales was the brothers would then fight amongst themselves to try and get more land between them. So as the generations progressed, more and more of the parcels of land would be divided up, and more castles would be built, and more internal wars between brothers and sisters and cousins and blah de blah de blah. On it went. Now this went on from the start of the Anglo-Norman invasion, starting obviously with Longshanks, and this went on till the 1500s, when finally things had quietened down. Wales had become a lot more peaceful, and the marcher sort of inheritance laws were scrapped. So that's why there's so many castles. At least that's what I can make out of the sort of very limited research that I've done. It is quite fascinating though, you know, how the laws were different in Wales and England and Scotland, and to some extent France as well at the time. So there we go, that's why there's so many castles in Wales, the Marcher lords. There's several books on the subject. Again, it's a fascinating bit of history that I wasn't aware of until recently when I've done my research. So here we are, Castle Dryslwyn. Not much left of the castle, but what actually happened here was the castle itself had an outer wall, but within the outer wall was a sizable, I would say a large village or a very small town. I'll show you the information boards on the way out. But all these lumps and bumps here, all the way down, that's the path we came up over there to get to the castle. Outside of here, it was quite a sizable village that encompassed the entire hillside, with a surrounding wall And the castle apparently itself was the only Welsh built castle that had 3 wards. Most castles only have 2. So you come into the castle, into the outer ward, in through an internal gate into the inner ward. But this was the only Welsh built castle that actually had 3 wards. A centre, a middle and an outer. So we'll go have a look around the ruins. As I say, there's not much of the castle left itself. But yeah, it's quite an interesting castle, this one. Again, on top of a hillside, power projection. This is my castle, keep away. Again, excellent views over the valley. Visibility in the landscape. Power projection. These are common themes within history and archaeology. So yeah, that thing on there is a Victorian folly, so we're not really interested in that. This is the castle, or what's left of it. And like I say, having done some research, I now understand things a little bit better. So there we go. Covers quite an extensive area, and a lot of it is actually gated off for, again, safety reasons, I'm guessing. Let's have a look in here because there's an information plaque. Here we go. This is the end of the castle, I think. This is the centre. Yeah, there we go. I'll just give you a bit of a zoom in there, just to give you a bit of information if you want to pause it and read at some point. Again, a lot of the buildings have obviously been eroded away over the years. There's going to be some oxbow lakes forming here in years to come. I don't know if any of you did geography at school. It's one of the very few things I remember, is how oxbow lakes are formed as the river meanders through. Eventually it'll cut through, isolating a bend in the river, forming an oxbow lake. But again, these things take decades if not centuries to form. But yeah, oxbow lakes. That may be one there actually. I think it might be, where the river would have gone around at some point, but as the river moves more slowly, it silts up and eventually blocks off, forming an oxbow lake, which eventually, again, over the years will dry up. That's a little bit of geography for you. History and geography in one video. Where else would you get it? There we go. Castle Dryslwyn. Again, it starts over there. There would have been an outer wall encompassing the village that side, and again part of the castle is here as well. So again, covering quite a large area, but again not as large as Caerphilly, because that is the largest castle in Wales. If you've watched my video on Caerphilly, know that already. Again, the meandering river Again, that's a prime candidate there for an oxbow lake. You see how the river comes down and around. What will happen is probably from there the river will cut in over the years and probably cut across here somewhere, and that big loop will then be isolated, forming the oxbow. I'm not just a pretty face, I do know a little bit. Again, more of the ruins of the castle. Across here. Very cloudy and windy today. We've been having a bit of a heat wave this summer in the UK. So I've even had to put a long sleeve shirt on today, which is kind of a blessing because it's been very hot. And as you know, us Brits, one thing we like doing is moaning about the weather. It's either too hot or too cold. It's never just right. But it makes a pleasant change today for it to be quite a breeze. It's quite pleasant actually. Lots of cloud cover. Oh. Welsh sheep is unusual to see sheep in Wales. That's a joke, obviously, because we all know Welsh lamb is probably some of the best lamb in the world. So we'll just take a walk down and I'll show you the information board with the artist's impression of the castle on its heyday and the quite large village which was associated with it. Eventually the castle was taken by Longshanks and kept in his power after that. Longshanks being Edward I, of course, those of you who have seen Braveheart. Here's a quick look at how the castle would have looked in the late, that's the outer ward from the late 13th century, middle ward and the inner ward there, and this is part of the actual quite substantial village that was associated with the castle, and the outer wall covered the entire village and the castle itself. Quite unique for a Welsh castle. So yeah, we'll just take a walk down to the final board which shows you the village in its entirety. If I say all this would have been a village as well at some point. There's the castle there itself on the highest point. Again, more Oxbow Lake candidates. So down to the final board. Just show you a quick look of how it may have looked in its heyday. So there we go. There's the castle, obviously, itself, the outer wall, and a quite substantial, well, I would actually say it's quite a large village or a small town, at least for medieval times anyway. There we go. That just tells you here the Lord of Dryslwyn has helped King Edward I complete control of the Welsh, but Rhys was dissatisfied with his reward and rebelled in June 1287, and Longshanks came in with 11,000 men and took the castle. The Lord fled, his wife and son were taken hostage, and from then on the castle was owned directly by the king. So there we go, Dryslwyn Castle. Quite an interesting one for the sheer fact of it. encompassing the village as well, and with having the 3 wards. So there we go, guys, that was Dryslwyn. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one. And don't forget, please like, comment and subscribe. Thank you very much.